What is up, YouTube? Dottz Gaming here, and today I'm bringing you guys my final installment of my leveling build series. Now, if this is the first one you are watching, though, and you don't know what the series is, this is a leveling build series, but they're not builds in the traditional sense. In my personal opinion, traditional leveling builds are kind of a waste of time. Whenever you're leveling, you're always replacing your gear, so why just keep repeatedly crafting it? And as a new player, you probably don't even have access to a crafter, either yourself or a friend, to constantly make you gear. And in terms of the abilities, you shouldn't be relegating yourself to one set of skills while you're leveling, and instead you should be experimenting and learning while you play. And the most important thing is to just have fun while you're leveling and learn the game and just have a good time. And a static leveling build and a static leveling progression can take that learning process away from a new player. Now, this video is a framework to follow, showing you some of the most commonly used abilities from each class and each role, with some of my own flair thrown into it, allowing you to pick and choose from a list and mix and match how you like. This will allow you guys to experiment with different ability combinations as you level up, and come the end of the game, you'll not only have a lot, if not all of the most commonly used abilities level up and morphed, but you'll also know which one of these you like the most and what works best for you, as opposed to just carbon copying someone else's build. Now, I'm going to be covering all the roles in this video: Magicka and Stamina DPS, tanks, and healers. A disclaimer before I start, though: this is just my opinion. I am not saying I'm the end-all be-all and that you have to follow this to a T. If you don't like something, change it. And remember, though, the goal of this framework is to set you up for end game and to make the leveling process easier and show you a direction to experiment in. You may need to respec come end game if you want to go in a more PvE or PvP direction, but that isn't what you should be even worrying about right now, nor do you need to worry about it until you're champion point 160. The goal of this guide is to simply assist you in your leveling process and help prepare your skill trees and abilities to be used in a proper setup of your own or someone else's design come end game. But with this intro out of the way, we are going into our final class, the new guy on the block, and that is the Warden. Now, Wardens are your users of nature magic, utilizing ice and nature to damage enemies and heal allies, as well as bolster their own defenses. Wardens can really fill every role relatively well. They make good healers, tanks, and damage dealers. Wardens make a good first character due to being able to fit into all of these roles quite nicely. They have a lot of built-in heals into their kit, some of which even can scale off of stamina. Now, when built correctly, easy and effective builds can be made, which will make the leveling process significantly easier. Shown on the screen right now is a timestamp for all the different build sections, so you can either skip to the section that concerns you or watch the video the full way through to learn all of the different ways to build your Warden. Moving into our first role, though, and that is Magicka DPS, with our race choices being High Elf, Breton, Dark Elf, and Argonian. Right, I would probably say for PvE purposes, High Elf is probably your best race, and for PvP, you can't really go wrong with the Argonian, but any one of these four races will honestly make a very solid choice. But I believe High Elf parses the highest for PvE as far as I know, but any one of these four races would be really solid. In terms of our gear selection, we are looking at 5 pieces of light, 1 piece of medium, and 1 piece of heavy. We are a Magicka DPS, so light is what we're going to want to be wearing. And you're wanted to use destruction staves, dual destruction staves, or a destruction staff or restoration staff for PvP. In terms of our attributes, we are going full on into Magicka. That is to be expected. We are a Magicka DPS. We want to have as big of a Magicka pool as possible, and also the more Magicka we have, the more damage we do. In terms of being a vampire, werewolf, or immortal, you're going to want to go with the vampire. The pros of being a vampire and gaining the extra recovery that you do outweigh the negatives that come along with it, so vampire is definitely worth picking up. In terms of our Mundus Stone, we are looking at the apprentice, the one that gives spell damage. I believe that is currently the highest parsing Mundus Stone. Another good option is Lover, but I believe that at come endgame, Apprentice will be parsing the highest, but I think Lover is also another viable option if you feel that you need more penetration in your build. In terms of potions and food, you're going to want to be using Magicka potions as a way to maintain your resources, and in terms of food, while not mandatory, if you can find some, try to get stuff that bolsters your health, Magicka, and or Magicka recovery. If you can't find something, though, that gives you these bonuses, do remember, though, that having any food on is better than having no additional buffs. In terms of our abilities, just a little blurb before I get into the list, you want to do your best to have one ability from each class tree on both your front and back bar. This is because when you gain experience, whether it be from killing monsters or doing quests, the abilities on your active bar are the ones that gain experience as well as their respective skill lines. Another cool trick is that if you have abilities on a skill bar that you want to level up, you can switch to that bar when handing in a quest or completing a dungeon to give them and their skill lines a surge of experience. Do keep in mind that some skill lines do not gain experience in the traditional way. For example, Mage's Guild's skill line levels up by collecting lore books. So if you're using Inner Light on your bar, for example, Inner Light will be getting leveled up, but your Mage's Guild as a tree won't be. So that's just something to keep in mind. Now you're going to notice though that I do frequently recommend the first skill of a skill tree as a choice, just to obviously help you get started getting that skill line leveled. If you want to level another weapon or skill tree without using that weapon or skill, simply placing a skill from that tree on your ability bar will help it gain experience while you gain experience on that active bar. You don't actually have to use the ability or weapon itself. In terms of our actual ability list though, starting with Animal Companion skill line, we have Dive, which you're going to want to morph into Screaming Cliff Racer. We also have Scorch, which will be morphed into Deep Fissure, Swarm, which will be morphed into Fetcher Infection, Betty Netch, which will be morphed into Blue Betty, and Falcon Swiftness, which will be morphed into Bird of Prey. In terms of Winter's Embrace, we have Frost Cloak, which you're going to want to morph into Expansive Frost Cloak, Impaling Shards, which you're going to want to morph into Winter's Revenge, and Arctic Wind, which will be morphed into Arctic Blast. From Green Balance, we have Fungal Growth, which you'll morph into Enchanted Growth, Living Vines, which will be morphed into Living Trellis, and Lotus Flower, which will be morphed into Lotus Blossom. From the Mage's Guild, we have Mage Light, which you'll want to grab Inner Light. From the Fighters Guild, we have Trap Beast, which you'll want to morph into Rearming Trap. From the Light Armor skill line, we have Annulment, which you'll morph into Harness Magicka. From Destruction Staff, we have Weakness to Elements, which you'll morph into Elemental Drain, and Wall of Elements, which you'll want to morph into Elemental Blockade. If you do choose to PvP and use a Restoration Staff on your back bar, you're also going to want to grab Steadfast Ward, which you'll want to morph into Healing Ward. In terms of our ultimates, we're looking at Sleet Storm from the Winter's Embrace skill line, which you'll want to morph into Northern Storm. From the Animal Companion skill line, we have Feral Guardian, which you'll want to morph into Wild Guardian. Do keep in mind, you need to slot this on both bars, because if you do not, when you switch off the bar that has Wild Guardian on it, the pet will not be summoned anymore, so this needs to stay on both bars. Another option is the Destruction Staff ultimate, Elemental Storm, which can be morphed into Elemental Rage, and then Meteor from the Mage's Guild, which you can morph into Shooting Star. In terms of our passives, we have the Animal Companion passives, Winter's Embrace, Green Balance, Racial, Light Armor, Destruction Staff, or the Restoration Staff passives if you're going to be PvPing. The Vampire passives, with the exception of Savage Feeding and Blood Ritual, Medicinal Use from Alchemy, Mage's Guild, we're looking at all of the Fighters Guild passives pretty much, with the exception of like Intimidate and the one that gives you Bounty Quest from Cyrodiil, but because we are using Rearming Trap, you're going to want to use those Fighters Guild passives, the Undaunted passives, and then eventually your non-5-piece requiring medium and heavy armor passives. In terms of our rotation, you want to try to use any abilities that give you a buff first, so that they make any subsequent abilities stronger or give you more buffs to your character. You also optimally want to use any AoE or dots in your build first, so use each dot or AoE on an enemy while weaving a light attack in between each of them, due to the fact that light attacks generate ultimate. You should have one spammable ability in your build when you want to use when you don't have to use any more buffs or apply any more dots or AoEs. So just keep that in mind when you're creating a build for yourself. And then using any CC shields and heals as needed. And you want to optimally make sure that you have a few of these at your disposal when making a build for general play. Moving into our Stamina Wardens. Stamina Wardens are performing great right now as the time of making this video. In terms of our race choices, we have Redguard, Khajiit, Wood Elf, or Orc. Any one of these races is a really good choice. I do believe that Redguard parses the highest. I said that on my sorcerer guide and some guy almost wanted to murder me. It's just a race combination. At the end of the day, the difference between Redguard and Khajiit is only going to be a small percentage. So really, you can play any one of these races that you want, but I do believe if you're trying to squeeze every possible ounce, that I believe Redguard is the tested choice. But I'm sure with the right combination, Khajiit, Wood Elf, or Orc can do just as well. In terms of our gear selection, we're looking at 1 light, 5 medium, and 1 heavy. Again, we're going to go in that medium armor because we are a stamina user. And then in terms of our weapon options, we have a couple different choices. We have dual wield and bow. You can even do double bow on a warden, on a stamina warden, or if you're going to be PvPing, you can look at 2H and bow. But you can really do any one of these combinations and kind of mess around and see how you like it. In terms of our attributes, we are going to be going all into stamina, simply to give us a bigger resource pool, and plus the more stamina we have, the stronger our stamina damage dealing abilities will hit. The stronger they'll be, excuse me. In terms of vampire versus werewolf versus being immortal, we are going to want to go vampire. Again, the recovery that you get from being a vampire greatly outweighs any of the negative side effects that come along from it. In terms of our Mundus Stone, we are looking at the warrior, the one that gives us weapon damage. It is currently the highest parsing Mundus Stone, but I believe that Lover is also another viable option. So if you think you want more penetration in your build as opposed to weapon damage, Lover is an also viable option. But I think at the end of the game, warrior will parse the highest. In terms of our potions and food, we're looking at stamina potions to maintain our resources. And then while food is not mandatory, if you can find some, try to optimally have something that increases your health, stamina, and or stamina recovery. If you can't though, use whatever food buffs you can find, because having any buff to your character is better than having no buff to your character. Now, a little blurb about the abilities before I get started though. You do want to do your best to have one ability from each class tree on both your front and back bar. This is due to the fact that when you gain experience, whether it be from killing monsters or completing quests, the abilities on your active bar are the ones that are going to gain experience as well as their respective skill lines. Another cool trick is that if you have abilities on a skill bar that you want to level up, you can switch to that bar when handing in a quest or completing a dungeon to give them and their skill lines a surge of experience. Now, keep in mind that some skill lines do not level up in this fashion, such as the Mage's Guild. The Mage's Guild requires you to collect lore books. The skills level up with regular experience, but the skill line itself levels up with lore books. So just hover your mouse over your skill line so you understand how they level up. Now, you're going to notice that I do frequently recommend the first skill of a skill tree as a choice, just to obviously help you get that skill line started in the leveling process. If you do want to level another weapon or skill tree without actually using it, simply placing a skill from that tree on your ability bar will help it gain experience while you gain experience on that bar. You don't actually have to use the weapon or the ability. Now, in terms of our ability selection for Stamina Warden, we are looking at from the Animal Companion line, Dive, which will be morphed into Cutting Dive. We also have Scorch, which will be morphed into Subterranean Assault, Betty Netch, which will be morphed into Bull Netch, Falcon Swiftness, which will be morphed into Bird of Prey. From Winter's Embrace, we have Frost Cloak, which will be morphed into Expansive Frost Cloak, and Crystallized Shield, that will be morphed into Shimmering Shield. From Green Balance, we have Fungal Growth, which will be morphed into Soothing Spores, and Lotus Flower, which will be morphed into Green Lotus. From Fighter's Guild, we have Trap Beast, which will be morphed into Rearming Trap. From Medium Armor, we have Evasion. You could take either morph based on if you're PvEing or PvPing. The one that removes snares will be for PvP, and the one that gives the longer duration will be for PvE. From Bow, we have Poison Arrow, which will be morphed into Poison Injection, Arrow Spray, which will be morphed into Acid Spray, and Volley, which will be morphed into Endless Hail. From Dual Wield, we have Twin Slashes. You can take either morph based on whether or not you want more damage in your build or if you feel you need more healing. We have Hidden Blade, which will be morphed into Shrouded Daggers, and Blade Cloak, which will be morphed into Deadly Cloak. From the Assault skill line, we have Vigor, which will be morphed into Resolving Vigor, as well as Caltrops, which will be morphed into Razor Caltrops. If you do decide that you want to go a PvP route and get your two-handed leveled up, or if you just want to level up your two-handed skill line a bit, some skills that I would recommend looking into are Critical Charge, which will be morphed into Critical Rush, Reverse Slash, which will be morphed into Reverse Slice, and Momentum, which will be morphed into Rally. In terms of our ultimate choices for the Stamina Warden, we have Dawnbreaker from the Fighters Guild, and you can take either morph. I've seen both used, so you can really choose which one you like. We also have Feral Guardian from the Animal Companion line, which will be morphed into Wild Guardian, and remember, this needs to be on both bars in order to be utilized properly. And then from Bow, we have Rapid Fire, which will be morphed into Ballista. So basically, I'd recommend either using Dawnbreaker and Ballista as your two ultimates, or utilizing Feral Guardian. You're obviously not going to use Feral Guardian and Dawnbreaker, so it would either be the Fighters Guild and the Bow ultimate would be your two ults, or just Feral Guardian. So you're going to want to pick and choose based on what you feel is best for your character. In terms of our passives, we have the Animal Companion, Winter's Embrace, and Green Balance passives from the class, the Racial passives, Medium Armor passives. We have our Dual Wield passives, or our 2H passives if we do plan on going a PvP route. We have the Bow passives, Vampirism passives, Alchemy from medicinal use from Alchemy, Fighter's Guild, Undaunted, and then your non-5-piece requiring light and heavy armor passives. Do keep in mind that obviously if you do want to go double bow, you do not need the dual wield passives, but that's really up to you to decide how you want to spend those skill points when the time comes. In terms of our rotation, like the Magicka Warden and like everybody else, you do want to make sure that you use any buffs first so that you can make any subsequent abilities use stronger, and they'll just give you more resistances, more buffs to your character to help you stay alive. You also optimally want to use any dots or AoE in your build first. So use each dot you have on an enemy while weaving a light attack in between each to generate ultimate. You also should have one spammable ability in your build to use when all of your dots are up and you do not need to buff yourself, and you want to use any CC shields and heals as needed. You optimally want to make sure that you have a few of these types of things at your disposal when making a build for general play. Now, moving on to the Warden tank for our races. We have Imperial, Argonian, Orc, or Nord. I believe Argonian technically is the best tank, but any one of these 4 races can work, but I do believe that Argonian is the best. In terms of our gear choices, we are looking at 1 light, 1 medium, 5 heavy. Obviously, we're going 5 heavy for the amount of resistances and the passives that are just very conducive to being a tank. And then we are going to be going double sword and board. You can go one-handed shield, resto staff. It's another option, but I believe that double SMB is definitely more viable. In terms of our attributes, I like for a general new tank leveling to go all points into health. I have seen some Warden tanks just split their points, I believe, evenly between Magicka and Stamina, but I believe that when you are a leveling tank, being that you're going to probably be wearing like a little bit of mishmash of gear, I would just recommend dumping your points into health and trying to use your gear in order to get more resources. I think it's gonna be easier for the leveling process. Come end game, you could obviously reallocate your attribute points to be more conducive with the gear you're wearing to give you the recommended stat thresholds that you should be meeting as a tank. In terms of vampire versus werewolf versus mortal, we are going to want to go vampire because of the fact that the recovery we get from being a vampire is greatly outweighing the negative side effects that we get because of it. In terms of our Mundus, we were going for the Lord again to just kind of max out our health pool there and give us as much health as physically possible. In terms of potions and food, you can really use any potion you want. Health potions are good to keep yourself alive, and then Magicka/Stam potions are good to keep your resources up. Now, while food is not mandatory, if you can try to get stuff that increases your base stats. I think that's a good way to use food while you're leveling as a tank. But just keep in mind, guys, any food is better than no food. So you can, if you can find something along your adventures, just use it just to give yourself a character that buff. Now, a little background on the abilities before I go into the list. You want to do your best to have one ability from each class tree on both your front and back bar. When you gain experience, whether it be from killing monsters, completing quests, whatever, the abilities on your active bar are the ones that gain experience as well as their respective skill lines. Another cool trick is that if you have abilities on a skill bar that you want to level up, you can switch to that bar when handing in a quest or completing a dungeon to give them and their skill lines a surge of experience. You're going to notice that I do frequently recommend the first skill of a skill tree as a choice, just to obviously help you get started with getting that skill line leveled. If you want to level another weapon or skill tree without actually using that weapon or skill, simply placing a skill from that tree on your ability bar is going to help it gain experience when you gain experience on that bar. You don't actually have to use the ability itself. Do keep in mind though that some skill trees do gain experience in different ways, such as the Mage's Guild skill line, which will gain experience from collecting lore books, not just using Mage's Guild skills. So just hover your mouse over the different skill lines so that you know how your skill lines gain experience. In terms of our ability list for the Warden tank, we are looking at Dive from Animal Companions, which will be morphed into Cutting Dive. We have Scorch, which you will want to morph into Subterranean Assault, Betty Netch, which you'll want to morph into Bull Netch, and Falcon Swiftness, which you'll want to morph into Deceptive Predator. We have Frost Cloak from Winter's Embrace, which you'll want to morph into Ice Fortress, Arctic Wind from Winter's Embrace, which will be morphed into Polar Wind, Crystallized Shield, which will be morphed into Shimmering Shield, and Frozen Gate, which will be morphed into Frozen Device. We have from Green Balance, Fungal Growth, which you'll want to morph into Soothing Spores, and Living Vines, which you'll want to morph into Living Trellis. From the One-Handed Shield skill line, we have Puncture, which you'll want to morph into Pierce Armor, Low Slash, which you'll want to morph into Heroic Slash, and Defensive Posture, which you'll want to morph into Absorb Magic. From the Undaunted skill line, we have Inner Fire, which you'll want to morph into Inner Rage, and Bone Shield, which you'll want to morph into Bone Surge. Our ultimate choices here are going to be Shield Wall from the One-Handed Shield skill line, which you'll want to morph into Shield Discipline, We have Warhorn from the Assault tree, which you'll want to take either morph. I've seen both used, so go whichever one you prefer. From Green Balance, we have Secluded Grove, which you'll want to morph into Healing Thicket. And then we have Sleet Storm from Winter's Embrace, which you'll want to morph into Permafrost. In terms of our passives, we have the class passives, Animal Companion, Winter's Embrace, Green Balance. We have our racial passives, Heavy Armor, One-Handed Shield with the optional Resto Staff passives. I do recommend using double One-Handed Shield, but if you decide to use a Resto Staff, grab the Resto Staff passives. And then in terms of an ability, I'd recommend looking at Healing Ward. From Vampirism, we have those passives except for Blood Ritual and Savage Feeding. We have Medicinal Use from Alchemy. We have Banish the Wicked from the Fighters Guild, Undaunted, and then your non-5-piece requiring light and medium armor passives. We do not have a rotation as a tank. We just use things in our kit as needed. Tanks don't have a rotation like DPS do. Moving on to our final role, and that is the Warden Healer. We have two racial options that are going to be our best, and that is Breton and Argonian. I do technically think Argonian is the best, but Breton is also another great option. In terms of our gear, we have 5 pieces of light, 1 piece of medium, and 1 piece of heavy, while using a lightning destruction staff and a restoration staff. The lightning destruction staff is very important because lightning destruction staffs, when used utilizing Wall of Elements and just lightning attacks in general, have a chance to apply off balance, which is an extremely important debuff for your group to have. In terms of our attributes, we are going to be going all into Magicka to optimize the strength of our heals as well as give us a larger Magicka pool. In terms of Vampire versus Werewolf versus Mortal, we are going to want to go Vampire. The recovery we gain from being a Vampire greatly outweighs the negative side effects, so Vampire is going to be what we want to use. In terms of our Mundus Stone, we have Atronach, which will give us more Magicka recovery. Healers love running high recovery, so Atronach just helps play into that wheelhouse. In terms of potions and food, we are going to want to run Magicka potions to help keep our resources maintained. And then while food is not mandatory, if you can find some, try to get stuff that increases either your health, your Magicka, and or your Magicka recovery. If you can't though, remember that any food buff is better than no food buff. Now, a little background for our abilities here. You want to do your best to have one ability from each class tree on both your front and your back bar. When you gain experience, whether it be from killing monsters, completing quests, the abilities on your active bar are the ones that gain experience as well as their respective skill lines. Another cool trick is that if you have an ability on a skill bar that you want to level up, you can switch that bar when handing in a quest or completing a dungeon to give them and their skill lines a surge of experience. Do keep in mind though that certain skill trees like the Mage's Guild will gain experience from collecting lore books, not from using its corresponding abilities. So just hover your mouse over the different skill trees so that you can understand how those skill lines gain experience. You are going to notice that in this list, I do recommend the first skill of your class skill trees as a choice, and this is obviously just to help you get that class skill line started in the leveling process. If you do want to level another weapon or a skill tree without actually using it, simply placing it on a skill from that tree on your ability bar will help it and its corresponding skill line gain experience. You do not actually have to use it. Now, moving on to our ability list, we have Die from the Animal Companion skill tree, which you are going to want to morph into Screaming Cliff Racer. We have Betty Netch, which you're going to want to morph into Blue Betty. From Winter's Embrace, we have Frost Cloak, which you want to morph into Expansive Frost Cloak. From Green Balance, we have Fungal Growth, which you're going to want to morph into Enchanted Growth. We have Healing Seed, which you want to morph into Budding Seeds. And Living Vines, which you'll want to morph into Living Trellis. From the Mage's Guild, we have Mage Light, which you'll want to morph into Inner Light. From the Destruction Staff, we have Wall of Elements, which you'll want to morph into Elemental Blockade. Weakness to Elements, which you'll want to morph into Elemental Drain. And then from the Restoration Staff skill line, we have Grand Healing, which you'll want to morph into Healing Springs. Regeneration, which you'll want to morph into Mutagen. Blessing of Protection, which you'll want to morph into Combat Prayer. Steadfast Ward, you could take either morph, whichever one you prefer. I've seen both used, so you can take your preference there. In terms of support, we want to grab Purge, which can be morphed into Efficient Purge, Annulment from Light Armor, which you'll want to morph into Harness Magicka, and then Necrotic Orb from the Undaunted skill line, which you'll want to morph into Energy Orb. In terms of our ultimates, we have Warhorn from the Assault skill tree, which you'll want to morph into Aggressive Warhorn, Sleet Storm from Winter's Embrace, which you'll want to morph into Northern Storm, and then Secluded Grove from Green Balance, which you'll want to morph into Healing Thicket. And then in terms of our passives, we have Animal Companions, Winter's Embrace, Green Balance, our Racial, Light Armor, Destruction Staff, Restoration Staff, Vampirism with the exception of Savage Feeding and Blood Ritual, Alchemy, Medicinal Use from Alchemy, Mage's Guild, Fighters Guild, Banish the Wicked, Support if you decide to use Purge, Undaunted, and then your non-5-piece requiring heavy and medium armor passives. And then in terms of our rotation, we do not have a set rotation like DPS do. You just want to use things in your kit as you need them. So that is it, guys, for the leveling build. Do keep in mind, guys, that these leveling builds are obviously, the whole point behind these leveling builds was to give you non-static leveling progression, to choose a good list of abilities to experiment from, to use, and to see what combination of a larger ability list works best for you. I had someone tell me that, oh, you don't need a leveling build while you're playing, just, you know, experiment, blah, blah, blah. But that was kind of the point of this. The point of this was to help you, give you more of a guided experiment. It wasn't to give you a static leveling progression, but it wasn't to just throw you to the wolves. It was to give you more of a guided experimentation process. Like, go ahead and experiment, but I would highly recommend experimenting with this pool of stuff so that come end game, you'll have the best stuff leveled up. You'll have the best stuff morphed so that you can either use someone else's build or design a strong build for yourself. But that was just one criticism that I got. I do think it was completely baseless, but I just wanted to address it. But if you guys enjoyed the leveling build series, the Warden leveling build, and if you enjoy all the content I have here on Dottz Gaming, would appreciate if you left a like on this video, and of course, if you could subscribe to the channel and hit the little bell next to it to always be updated from when I do things here on YouTube. That would also be fantastic. But I appreciate you guys watching this video. This leveling build series was really, really fun to make. I think it's going to be a great resource for the community. We've desperately needed updated leveling guides for the different classes, so hopefully you guys have enjoyed the resource that I have provided. So thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate you sticking it all the way to the end. It means a lot. And of course, guys, as always, I am Dottz Gaming. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next one.